My name is Markus Müschen. I'm from City of Hope Comprehensive Cancer Center. And yesterday I had the opportunity to present a new concept that came from a discovery in our lab. It's a fairly basic science discovery, but one that we hope might be relevant in the development of drugs for lymphoid malignancies, including B-cell lineage acute lymphoblastic leukemia, ALL, and also some B-lymphoid lymphomas like mantle cell lymphoma and CLL. And the discovery relates to what we call metabolic gatekeepers. And these gatekeepers may have a similar function to what we know about p53, for instance, which is thought as a gatekeeper of the genome. So we found that there's a mechanism in place that safeguards B cells from malignant transformation by oncogenes, which is driven by metabolism. The reason for this is that B cells are threatened from two directions. One is that, of course, they can be transformed to give rise to leukemia and lymphoma. And the other threat for humans comes from the fact that B cells can make self-directed antibodies, autoantibodies, which then cause autoimmune disease. And we found that restriction of metabolic supply like glucose and ATP serves a dual purpose. The gatekeeper restricts energy, which then means that oncogenes that would consume this energy cannot function properly and cannot fuel malignant transformation of these cells. And the same applies to production of autoantibodies, because autoantibodies expressed on B lymphocytes would also consume a lot more energy than from in a normal B cell that doesn't express an autoreactive antibody. So our discovery relates to the fact that limiting energy in B lymphocytes would prevent B cells to become fully autoreactive and also to be transformed by oncogenes like kinases that would be energy consuming. And if this happens, then these B cell clones are efficiently eliminated from the system, and that's essentially a layer of protection that we have. Now, the question is, how does this work? And so in our lab over the past few years, we did mechanistic and mostly genetic experiments to identify the mechanism that enables gatekeeper mechanisms, and we found that this is mediated by transcription factors that dictate B cell identity, factors like Icaros and PAX5. And interestingly, these factors are deleted or mutated in the vast more than 80% of B-ALL cases. And we found that these factors not only guide and instruct B cell identity and B cell differentiation, they also restrict the amount of energy that can come into B cells by repression of glucose transporters and the proximal glucose utilization chain, and thereby function as gatekeepers, and that's essentially the discovery. So in terms of therapeutic possibilities, we are now testing several ways of taking advantage of this gatekeeper function in B-cell malignancies. One is that we add to the energy consumption that oncogenes already have. That's a strain that these tumor cells are facing, and we are trying to exacerbate it to selectively induce cell death. And we achieve that by further activating kinases that would consume ATP. So if, for instance, a leukemia carries the B-cell-able oncogene, which is a tyrosine kinase that utilizes ATP, and these cells are already at the limit of the energy amount that they have to fuel this oncogene. One approach that works well in our lab is actually to intensify energy consumption by strengthening these kinases, and this leads to the collapse of those cells because they exceed the amount of energy that the energy demand has on them, and so these cells die from acute energy crisis. So triggering this metabolic gatekeeper mechanism only works in B cells, and that reflects the fact that B cells actually have this inbuilt mechanism to weed out autoreactive cells, and this is something that other cells don't have. So we have made the observation that if you try to use the same mechanism for solid tumors, for instance, then it doesn't work because these cells cannot make autoantibodies, so this mechanism of negative selection doesn't work in them. So it's a fairly specific mechanism that fortunately seems to work in all the B-cell malignancies we have studied so far, including ALL, mantle cell lymphoma, and CLL. But then beyond that, it's really restricted to the B-cell lineage. And the other aspect is we of course realize that hyperactivation of kinases is counterintuitive, and it's effectively the opposite of what everyone else is doing by trying to develop kinase inhibitors, like tyrosine kinase inhibitors, for instance. And but beyond that, a potential caveat of our approach could be that hyperactivation of kinases in itself could carry a certain risk, and we are trying to mitigate that by limiting exposure. So the approaches that we are currently taking is that we are developing compounds that lead to acute, drastic hyperactivation of kinases to commit B-lymphoid tumor cells to cell death, but then do it for a very short, very limited period of time. And in doing so, we are testing glucuronidated conjugates that have a very short plasma half-life, so we can achieve a short spike that has a high concentration for a limited period of time, but then is quickly eliminated from the system. So that's the approach we are currently testing in animal models, and we hope that this will satisfy safety concerns that this approach potentially might have. So we are excited by this, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to present this concept yesterday. It was a good experience for us, and I hope we can circle back as we develop this process further. Thank you for your attention, and please join the conversation on Twitter.